Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Detroit Institute of Art's Thursdays at the Museum program. I'm Amanda Harrison, a Community Engagement Manager with the DIA. Thank you for joining us for today's program, a talk on the Detroit Industry Murals. During the program, I'd like to encourage you to please ask questions. You can do this by selecting the Q&A icon on the right-hand side of your screen. Questions will be read on screen by Christine Mark, our Manager of Volunteer Development. This event is being recorded, so if you'd like to watch it again later, you can find a link on our YouTube page. Today, we're joined by our chairs of the Docent Committee, Howard Rosenberg and Ray Henney, who's joining us all the way from San Francisco. Please give our hosts a warm welcome.
Hello, everybody. I'm Howard Rosenberg. It's good to be with you today. I'm excited for this presentation, and I'm going to toss it right over to Ray because we have a lot to cover.
Thanks, Howard. I'm Ray Henney, and Amanda's right. I am in San Francisco, no tide today. It's California, Ray. But we are very excited to do this virtual presentation on Detroit Industry Murals done by Diego Rivera. These murals are internationally famous. People come from around the world just to see the murals. They have many fascinating stories associated with them. They're layered in lots of meaning. We don't have time, Howard and I, to cover all the detail and wonderful perspectives that we could share on the murals. So we're going to try to give a solid presentation that covers the basics of the murals. So why don't we start? Howard, as you said, we have a lot to cover. Why don't we start?
I am ready, Ray.
All right, here we go. So before it was Rivera Court, it was known as the Garden Court, and it was just a place that looked like an inside garden of a classical architecture. The museum's architect was Paul Cray. The museum was built finished in 1927, and this is how it looked before Diego Rivera came to Detroit to do his murals in April of 1932. This was meant to be a place for, not for art, but for meditation or to have a smoke or a conversation. But in the 11th months that Rivera was there, from April of 1932 to March of 1933, he changed it to look like this. And while the fountain was removed in the 80s, the murals themselves are the same as they were on the day that Rivera finished them in 1933. Now, true that it's been 90 years since he did these murals, and true that the technology that he's displaying is out of date. And it's also true that the people who are shown are long since deceased. But these murals are as relevant today as the day that they were finished by Rivera. They're relevant because they explore timeless questions about technology and the impact on our society and on our humanity. These are questions about the advantages and disadvantages of our technology. That concept about something having good or bad, maybe simultaneously being good or bad, is very much a part of Diego Rivera's Mexican culture. That duality, the concept of duality, is very much a part of it and is seen in these murals in various ways. The murals are best understood by an exploration of two questions. What are we making? How are we making it? And how does that impact our humanity? Now, Diego Rivera was an extremely talented young man. He was born outside of Mexico City in 1886. He showed a lot of talent and eventually studied in Europe for 12 years. 8 of those years were in Italy, where he studied the 15th century Italian style of doing murals. And that style of murals is very similar, and is similar to what he did in Detroit with the murals, and is, believe it or not, similar to what Michelangelo did in the Sistine Chapel. Very briefly, it's 5 layers of plaster that are applied to the wall, of various thickness, thick, thinner, thinner, thinner. And the 5th layer is the thinnest layer, and while it's still wet, he applies a mineral-based paint. It has limestone in it, just like the plaster has limestone, so the paint becomes part of the wall. The advantage of that is it's extremely durable. It doesn't crack, it doesn't fade, it doesn't chip. It will last hundreds and hundreds of years. The challenge, however, is that the plaster dries and the paint within 6 to 10 hours. So you have to work quickly. And if you change your mind or make a mistake, you have to chip it off and start again. So it can be a very laborious and difficult process. When Rivera came back to Mexico, he and some other Mexican artists founded the Mexican mural movement. And that was a movement about having public art, murals on walls that the public could enjoy. And those murals were based on subject matter or grounded in Mexicans' indigenous cultures. What I mean by indigenous, pre-Columbian or pre-Spanish exploration and colonization of the Mexican area, and also the working class, a combination of the two. And the Mexican mural movement propelled Rivera into international fame along with his paintings. Howard?
Great, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. That set us up very nicely. So here we have the 2 fellas that are most responsible for bringing Rivera to Detroit. The man in the gray suit is Edsel Ford. He was the president of the Ford Motor Company and also the president of the Arts Commission, the commission that ran the museum at the time. And this other guy, this is William Valentiner. William Valentiner is most responsible for the way the museum is today. He was our director at the time that it opened in 1927. He stayed there until 1945 at the mandatory retirement age of 65. And it was his idea that they get Rivera to do the murals. It was Ford and he wanted to do something nice for the city in the midst of a depression in 1932. Remember, the museum was only open for 5 years already. So he flies out to San Francisco. Ray, you're in San Francisco now. Have you visited the Pacific Coast Stock Exchange?
Not this trip, but I have in the past.
Have you seen Rivera's mural there?
I have. It's extraordinary.
So that's where Rivera was at the time, painting the Pacific Coast Stock Exchange. And he went out there, he explained to Rivera what they had in mind. And what they had in mind was painting 2 walls and painting the Detroit industry, the auto company, Ford Motor Car Company. And Rivera actually loved the idea because to him, he had 2 things in mind. He knew that he loved machinery, and he knew that modern technology, like the auto company, which was the highest tech industry in the world at the time, would help to raise the level of the worker. And he was very concerned with how the workers were being treated. And he was very concerned with having an ability to influence their lives. And he thought he could impact their lives by doing that. So he jumped at the opportunity to do that. And he came to Detroit with his wife, Frida Kahlo, in April of 1932. He sketched for a couple of months and he began work on the murals in July of 1932. He finished in March of 1933. And let me see here, Ray. How do I go to the next slide, Ray? There we go.
Actually, you did, Howard.
I went to the, oh, I see. It just took me a second. So everybody, listen, I'm new at this. I used to be on the other side and I could do it right away. So I have to be patient, right, Ray? To press the button.
Howard, Howard, that isn't exactly one of your qualities, but I'm sure you can come through it.
I just did that, right? I went backwards, didn't I?
You did that. You went backwards, Howard. I'm proud of you.
Forward.
Look at you. Look at you, Howard.
Okay, I got it. I got it. Okay, so so you're looking at the east wall. That was a close-up of the east wall, and this is the picture that Ray had. And you're looking at the east wall, and Diego was 46 at the time. He walked in, this is what he saw, only it was a garden court. And he was with Frida, his wife, who was 21. They had just been married a year. Frida is pregnant when they come in here. He looks at all this, and he was hired to paint this area and this area. And he saw all these other panels, and he wanted to paint everything because he had a bigger idea than just the auto industry. He wanted to paint his cosmology of the world, his idea of how the world worked, how there was duality to the world, there was constructive and destructive forces, how there was interdependence, how there was more than just the auto industry, there were other industries. So he convinced Ford and Valentina to let him paint everything. They bought his idea, they doubled his payment. Edsel Ford paid all the money out of his own pocket, so he gets props for that. And then he began to paint. So the big idea of how he began to paint was, we always need to keep in mind a church mural. Just like the Sistine Chapel, as Ray mentioned before. And so when you walk into a church, the first place you walk into is, and you're looking at, is the east wall. And the east wall is where the cross is, where the God figure is. And to Rivera, the God figures are always people, are always humans. And so what you're looking at is, you're seeing a large, round woman on the right and on the left. One has blonde hair on the left, and the woman on the right has dark hair. And they're holding, you can't see it now, there'll be close-ups in a moment. They're holding wheat, and they're holding fruit, and they're holding vegetables. And then in the center, you see a little baby, a fetus, in a bulb, and it looks like the earth is feeding the baby. And there's layers of minerals here. There's layers of silica, salt, iron ore, coal, and these funny shaped things here are plowshares, blades. And so what Rivera is telling us is the very first industry is agriculture. The very first thing that we're dependent upon is being able to feed ourselves. And so what we are we're all dependent on the earth. And so he's representing that by the baby in the bulb. He's representing humanity by that he's showing us. And those minerals that you were seeing are going to be a common theme throughout. The wavy minerals are the items that go to make up steel, except for salt, because Detroit is on the largest collection of salt above it, the salt mines below us. As many of you might know, we have the largest reserve of salt in the world. And so he's showing us who we are by painting that in. Then, how am I doing, Ray, in terms of moving the slide? Pretty good, huh?
Yeah, I mean, for you, Howard.
So here's a woman on the left. You see how round she is? It's as if she has no bones. So she is an idealized woman representing North America, her blonde hair, and the other woman is an idealized woman representing South America, her dark hair. And they're holding the products, the agricultural products. This style of painting Rivera did from the Mesoamerican style, and he carries that through the pre-Columbian, before Columbus made it here, and he uses that style all the way through. So you'll note that as you go through. Christine, at this point, let's stop a moment and ask you, are there any questions?
Are all of the slides you're showing us right now on that first east wall, Howard?
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you.
Slide that we just looked at are on that wall.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So that was the east wall. That was the beginning of the day. Now you have the west wall, Ray?
Yes, and the west wall, as Howard was saying, is in the cathedral style, the endings. Typically, it's the Last Judgment or the end of days. In fact, the Sistine Chapel famously has a Michelangelo painting of the Last Judgment, in which the Jesus figure is here, and to his right, our left, are those that are going to be saved. And to the Jesus figure's left, our right, are those who are, will have damnation, are damned. The damned are on this side. And Rivera follows that. Now, it's also the end of days with respect to the end of where technology is at the time Rivera did this. This is the latest and greatest technology. So up here you have what is known as the aviation panels. You've got the center panel and then these two end panels. We'll be exploring that in a moment. And then you have the mass production of electricity here. This is actually Power Station 1 at the Ford Rouge plant. This was the largest electrical production facility in the world at the time, and it was feeding the largest factory in the world at the time. But before we go there, Howard mentioned interdependence. So we're going to talk about this particular panel right here. This particular panel is concerns the interdependence, again, the theme of interdependence of North and South America. And what Rivera indicates here, and this is a close-up of it, is the gathering of rubber in the Amazon, the Brazilian Amazon, and the rubber being transported. These fish represent the Amazon, if you will, and they turn into boats representing the Detroit River. In fact, the skyline of Detroit at the time is shown here by Rivera, and that's the view from Belle Isle. Rivera and his wife Frida Kahlo frequently would picnic when Rivera had time at Belle Isle. He enjoyed it very much, and this is what the scenery that you would see at the time of Detroit. In any event, the rubber would come to the port facility for the Rouge plant, the port outlet for the Rouge plant. So Rivera is showing that interdependence, resources of South America, the ingenuity of North America, making a team effort, a cooperative effort. Then you have this in the center, this flesh face, this skeleton, and this star. And remember when we were talking about the saved on this side and the damned on this side. And Rivera's following that particular aspect with this figure, but it's a very interesting figure. It's based upon an ancient Mexican culture, the Tlaxcala culture, and it's a life and death mask. Remember this concept of duality. So this has been going on for thousands of years in the Mexican culture, in life and death, this sense of, good and bad, in death, life and death. And so Rivera uses the human figure here on this side, the left side, that looks a little bit like George Washington, the first revolutionary in the Americans. And then, of course, you have this, the skeleton. And then you have the star in the center. And the star typically represents hope. And an interpretation is that what Rivera is hoping for, or what he's suggesting here, is the hope that humanity will choose the constructive side of technology, the constructive side of things, versus the destructive side of things. And he very much explores that question in the next panel. This is the aviation panel. So to your left is the Stout engineering facility that actually existed outside Dearborn, Michigan, that made the Ford tri-motor plane, an extremely successful plane for many, many years. And at the Stout facility, they made passenger planes. Then you can see on the right-hand side the same technology used for warplanes. And you can see this fellow, this pilot here. And Howard, doesn't he look like, you know, he's distressed? Like there's a sense of terrible humanity, you know what I mean, distress on his part. And Rivera continues that with the panel on to the left here and to the right here. So again, this is the passenger plane, the construction of the passenger plane. Whoops. And here is the right side, far right side, and you can see the warplanes. And these figures here are terrifying at the time. They're terrifying now, but they were terrifying at the time because in people's memories in the early 30s was the use of gas during World War I, which killed thousands of people and really injured many of the soldiers. So this was a terrifying sight, and Rivera punctuates that terrifying sight by putting this horn here. This horn is reminiscent of a medieval demon, you know, the paintings of medieval demons. So you have this technology. Are you going to use it to create something constructive, like the passenger planes, or something destructive, like the warplanes? And Rivera punctuates that point by the panels underneath each. Under the passenger plane, you have a dove, a representation of peace, and under the warplane, you have a predatory hawk, obviously a symbol of destruction. Now we're going down to the two panels on the either side of the entrance. This is Power Station 1, as I mentioned. The coal was burnt at the time. It created steam that went through the pipes and then turned the turbine that created the electricity. You have here in the bottom a representation of management and over here of labor. And they're equal status, equal stature for Rivera because it's a partnership. They are both needed in order to accomplish industry. So this fellow here, Howard, the manager, has a ruler. Howard, what does the laborer have?
The laborer has a hammer, Ray.
Yes, and let's look at that glove, Howard. What do you notice about the glove?
I'm seeing a red star right there on his left arm.
Yeah, I know. So you've got a red star and a hammer, which is the symbol of, right, Russian communism, right?
Got it.
Yeah. So how did Rivera get away with that? Well, at that particular time, the Monte Manufacturing Company here in Detroit made that glove. And many of the laborers used Monte's gloves. And they had that red star. Remember, Howard, this is pre-World War II. This is before the Cold War. A company could put a red star on their product and it wouldn't mean it's communist or necessarily evoke the sentiment of communism. However, the Detroit news caught on after the murals were displayed. In any event, so you have that on one side with labor. And then we have on the other side, as I said, the turbine with management. Howard, turbines are donut shaped, but this one isn't. What does it look like to you? Can I give you a hint?
Gigantic ear.
Doesn't it look like a gigantic ear? And it's
like
meant to. And in fact, it parallels the ear on management. And it's kind of a parody, if you will, about management, that management's always listening. You know, the eye of management or the ear of management, always listening. And this particular fellow is very interesting because it's a composite. It's a composite of two titans at the particular time. A composite of Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. They both changed the world in their own way, and they were best friends, and which is why Rivera put them together in a composite. Howard?
Yes, sir. Okay, here we are at the beginning of what Ford and Valentiner thought was going to be the process. This wall right here is what they thought they were hiring him to paint along with the other wall on the opposite side. And it wasn't until later that he painted everything. So just looking at this wall, just to give you a sense of how fast he did it, he painted this one area in 26 days. Let me set you up and explain how Rivera was thinking and how things worked. Let's go back to the church and how you would paint a church fresco. At the top, you would paint the God figures. Think the Sistine Chapel. Think God and Adam. Then in the middle, you would paint a scene of the life of that saint or person, depending on the church, depending on what you wanted to be painted, depending on what you commissioned the muralist to do. So here, the muralist was commissioned to paint an auto industry. And then at the bottom, in these small little panels, these grayscale panels called grisaille, as Ray was talking about before, he painted the day-to-day, hour-by-hour activity of that particular saint, or in this case, the workers. So that's generally how the setup went. Ray's going to talk a little bit about the specifics. Ray?
Sure. What we're going to talk about, and you can see that's the north wall, and you have a similar theme in the south wall. It's the same kind of theme in the south wall that Howard was just talking about, exactly the same. So let's talk about these upper registers. Let's start with the north wall. So you have here, we're going to focus here first on this figure here, the volcano and the hands, and then we'll go to the figures in just a moment. So here you have, Howard, a volcano, and you have these hands that are gently holding these minerals. It shows the industry of mining, which was a Detroit industry at the time. But notice, Howard, how supple and calm the hands are holding the minerals. And then on the opposite side, in the south wall, you have this. It says a Mesoamerican pyramid here. It's an Aztec pyramid. Aztec pyramids were made by enslaved people. And you can see the agitation in the hands. Look how agitated the hands are, Howard. In fact, they're even violent. Some of them are even violent looking. So remember the questions. This one is, how are we making things? Are we making things so that the workers are calm and complete and satisfied with their work? Or are we making things so the workers feel exploited? So that's the message that Rivera is communicating there. So let's talk about these particular panels. Again, we're getting to the same question, how are we making things, in a very interesting way. So in Rivera's culture, the races were known by the color of people's skin with all dignity. There was no negativity meant by the way that they categorized the races. So here you have what is known as the red race, which is Native Americans from both North and South America. And Rivera couples the red race with iron ore, as you can see here, and Howard mentioned iron ore before. Or on this particular side, you have the black race, typically associated with Africans. And the black race, Rivera couples with coal. And on the opposite wall, the south wall, you have the white race, typically European, and the white race is holding limestone. And on the right side, you have the yellow race, typically Asian, and the Asian figure is holding sand. So why does Rivera use those particular components? Well, as Howard was just mentioning, those are the essential elements of steel. So this is really a social commentary on Rivera's part. When the races work together, they make something strong and lasting. And Rivera shows that on this particular panel. This is on the north side of the Rouge plant. And notice how we have workers of different races and different nationalities. Again, how are we making things? Howard?
Thank you, Ray. Christine, are there any questions at this point?
Yes, there is. The one panel, the grisaille panel, the predella on the bottom that's done in grisaille, and then the west wall grisaille. There's a question as to what is that term, and can you explain it?
It's a French term for meaning grayscale. It's to make it appear as if it were sculptural, as if it were a relief, as opposed to the color portrait. So he wanted to create a break in your vision, and he wanted to have you see different things. Ray, do we have this? So you see how, and it's a little bit hard to see, but if you're at the museum, it's open Wednesday through Sunday, and you need a time ticket to get in, so go to the website. It looks as if these are steel or metal gates, and you have that open there on both sides. And so he has this looking as if it's a black and white relief sculpture that's separating you from the workers, but because it's open, he's inviting you in. He's inviting you in to see that. Does that help, Christine?
Yes, I think so. The viewer also said that they, when you were speaking about the predella, they misunderstood what you meant by that. So I think you just clarified it.
Okay. So Ray, help me find my spot.
Oops, there you go, Howard.
There you are. Thank you. Thank you for keeping me straight. So this is a close-up of the centerpiece of the north wall that he painted in 26 days. And the north wall was a depiction of 5 different plants at the Ford Rouge plant. And it was a production of the 1932 Ford V8 engine, the first year that was produced. And so if you look, you'll see a few things that are unique to Rivera's style of mural painting and fresco painting. First off, you have deep perspective. You have things moving way into the background. In general frescoes, that doesn't happen. Everything is static, everything is flat, and people don't show any motion. In this case, he's showing you a lot of motion. He's showing you how people are moving, how the men are moving. And he particularly paid attention to the men that he put in there, because all these men have different nationalities. If you see their faces, he knew who they were. So he put men of different color and different nationalities into the painting, because his view was, we're all the same, we're all equal, and we're all interdependent on each other. Now let's take one fella, for example, this guy right here, in the hat and the little round glasses that are white. His name was Harry Glicksman. Harry worked for Ford in the tool and die shop. And the reason we know this is Ray and I were in the museum at Rivera Court one day when Harry's grandson Ted was there. And Ted told us a story about how his grandfather came to be in the painting. He said Harry came home one day and told his wife, Ted's grandmother, that some guy, get that, some guy walked into the tool and die shop, looked at me and asked if he could draw my picture. That guy was Rivera, and Harry is immortalized in this painting. Harry used to wear that hat. That's what Rivera liked every day. And when you're at the museum, you'll see he was also wearing a tie with his overalls. Now, Ray, up here, what temperature does that feel like to you?
Extremely hot, Howard.
That red temperature, that's a depiction of the blast furnace. The blast furnace is taking minerals that volcano above that was not erupting gave us, iron ore, coal, etc., and was putting it in this extremely hot bath and melting it down to create steel. So we're taking the minerals that the earth gives us and turning it into something that could be potentially used for constructive purposes. These machines here are spindle stamping machines. These stamping machines were what created the openings in the engine block for the pistons. And they resembled two Rivera, who used them as symbols of the Toltec warriors, these stone statues in Mexico that were carved and set up to protect their warriors about 3,000 years ago. So that's how Rivera did that. And Ray's going to talk a little bit about one of the other panels, but before he does, you can see that he used the conveyor belts to divide up all the action in there. Ray?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Howard, and it really shows the movement. Rather than putting things in individual squares, he uses the cables. Howard, look at this perspective that these figures give. Doesn't it look like the line is going on forever?
Forever.
Isn't that interesting? I'm wondering if that's what Rivera intended, that the line just keeps going. In any event, we're going to take a look at this area up here. And again, you can see the girders and the line and everything else that separate things. But this particular area is of interest. So this is Howard. Thanks, Howard. This is, it says sand mixing molds. What it is the workers here are taking chemicals and sand and they're packing the molds for the V8 engine that was being produced. This was the first year of the V8 engine and it was revolutionary. It really changed the automobile. It was much more dependable and it was very quick. In fact, famously, Clyde Barrow of Bonnie and Clyde wrote Henry Ford a letter congratulating Henry Ford on how wonderful that car is because it was so useful to them in robbing banks. But so that's kind of the positive side of this. But you notice, Howard, how green everybody is?
I do.
And they're not really green people. He's showing that the toxicity of these chemicals. And these workers don't have any gloves on. They don't have any eyewear protection. There's no protection whatsoever. And here you have the one and only self-portrait of Rivera. And this is Rivera here in the bald bowler hat. And there we go. You can see sort of the resemblance. Rivera is communicating his displeasure at the workers' conditions, you know, this very hazardous condition. So that goes to that question. How are we making things? You know, it's a great product, but at what cost?
At what cost, Ray? Exactly.
Howard?
So Ray, we're going to talk about the panels on either side of the automotive panels. The one on the right we're looking at now, and in a moment we're going to look at the one on the left. Ray, what does this panel look like?
It looks like the nativity scene, Howard. You've got the animals in the foreground. You've got two figures that look like maybe Mary and Joseph, and then you have three individuals in the back, like the three wise men or the three kings.
You got it. So that's exactly right. It looks exactly like a nativity scene. And right below it, you can see it on the left here. There's a narrow panel, smaller panel. So right below it is that other panel. So let's look at these two together. It does look like a nativity scene. Rivera planned it that way. Rivera planned to make it look like a nativity scene. He didn't plan it to be blasphemous. He didn't plan it to be irreligious. He didn't plan it to get anybody upset, I don't think, but people did get upset. They thought it was blasphemous. The church was angry with it. They wanted it removed, but Ford and Valentiner stood by it, and it's there today. And this scene is a scene of constructive use of technology, something we can certainly use today, right, Ray? This is a scene of vaccination. This is a scene of a baby getting vaccinated for smallpox. And that's exactly where we are today. This whole Thursday at the Museum is existing because of COVID, because of the pandemic. And we're all waiting anxiously for a safe and effective vaccine so we can all get back to where we want to be at the museum. In the meantime, here's what is represented by positive, constructive technology. A doctor giving a vaccine to a baby with the three men, the three wise men are three scientists, Louis Pasteur, Elie Mellenkopf, and Robert Koch. That's who Rivera painted. And the doctor is Valentiner himself. He honored Valentiner by making him the doctor. And apparently Rivera had a crush on a Hollywood starlet because this person is Jean Harlow, a famous Hollywood starlet from the 1930s. And the baby is not the baby Jesus. The baby is the Lindbergh baby that was kidnapped earlier that year, Ray. Charles Lindbergh, the Jr. So you see here painting of the Lindbergh baby, the photograph, William Valentiner and Jean Harlow. And the animals were used for growing serum in their systems. It's how they did it now. Today we use eggs. So, and back up here you see a little fetus that's healthy, that's again being fed, same theme, by those waves of iron ore and coal and salt. And outside are clumps of bacteria. He actually had books, medical books from Henry Ford Hospital that he used as models to draw bacteria, Staphylococcus aureus and various other things. And so that's what he did to demonstrate positive and constructive technology. And we'll get to any questions in a minute, but I want to talk about the destructive use of technology, which is the panel on the other side. So he was juxtaposing constructive and destructive use of technology. And we're back to those gas masks that Ray was showing you in the aviation panel. They're scary looking people, Ray. These are scary looking guys that are creating poison gas that was used in World War I, the weapon of mass destruction. And he's showing you, now it wasn't made that at the same place, but he's representing the bomb that was used. He's representing these tanks that go off onto infinity in the perspective. They're all in these masks, and below it, like the healthy fetus in the other panel, he's showing you gas surrounding cells that are dying. So constructive, destructive use of technology. Christine, before we go on, any questions?
A couple. I'm going back to the vaccination panel. Can you reiterate, I know you said that Rivera used the format of the teachings of the Catholic Church to create this, and that the clergy at the time felt that it was very sacrilegious and it made it very controversial. But could you tell us a little bit more about how Rivera chose this composition for the vaccination panel?
You know, I will tell you, I am not sure how to answer that question. Ray, I mean, you can weigh in on this, but from what my reading and my understanding has been, that he felt this would be, you know, what you have, let's go back to this. The big thing is the man, the woman, and the child, right? So civilization is based on those three personages: a baby, a woman, and a man. The baby and the woman and the man are the structural feeling of society. So you have Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus in the Christian faith. You have everything starts with the family. So I believe that Rivera probably used that construction, man, woman, and child, when he was thinking about it. And because he was raised in the Catholic Church, because he was a strong Catholic prior to becoming an atheist, that would have been in his head. What do you think about that?
Howard, and also, you were talking about the importance of vaccines. They were extremely important back then, and to the extent that in the Christian religion, this scene is like a new beginning, like a new salvation, that this kind of medicine was, altering to humanity, very positive. It's meant to be positive. It's meant to be a positive event.
Okay, so any other questions?
No, yeah, the idea that also Rivera spent 10 years in Italy too, so he was really familiar with the format of Catholic churches. Even though he wasn't directly speaking to religion when he did this panel, he was just referring to the format of it, I think. And the format you mentioned of the murals in general, all 27 panels have some connections to the format of a Catholic church as well. So, yeah, building on that idea, I think you guys hit all the points.
Right.
Sure. Howard, we're going to talk about the Padella panels. And you were mentioning before these particular panels. And there's 5 of the Padella panels on this side and 5 on the south wall. And they all depict a day in the life of a worker. You can see that they're punching in here at the foundry, this particular area. And unfortunately, we don't have time to cover all 10. They're very interesting. Some of them are very significant. But we're going to cover this one that was on the very right side of the north wall. And here is, as it says, lunchtime. And here are the workers. And you were talking about, Howard, how it's monotoned. This particular style, this grisaille style, is very monotone. And he uses the gray that makes them look anonymous, you know, not like people, and they don't have really any kind of real facial features, and they have their head down. They're not like talking to each other or animated at all. And here they are eating at their stations by the machines they work at. It's as though, Howard, that they are part of the machine, or that it's part of this collective. You talked about cosmic forces, that Rivera, pictured cosmic forces with respect to the panels. And it's as though industry was a cosmic force of itself, or almost, if you will, I don't mean to be too dramatic, but sort of a kind of a god, that humanity was sacrificing itself to. So that's a very interesting panel that we wanted to bring to your attention. Now we're going to move to the south wall. Howard was describing the north wall, which was the manufacturing of the engine primarily. The south wall is primarily, with respect to the Rouge plant here, the final assembly. You have stamping presses that we'll look at in a minute. And then you also have this particular panel here that we're going to be discussing in just a moment. So here's the detail of the Rouge plant. As Howard was saying, while the north wall is 10 different operations and 5 buildings, the same is true of the south wall. It's multiple operations in multiple buildings. Again, you have lines and girders that separate the various functions. You've got a stamping press that stamps the sheet metal for the body. Stamping press over here. They're assembling it. You've got, difficult to see, but they're doing the painting process. The workers are working hard. They're very dignified. And you have this fella here. He is a manager. That's based upon an actual Ford manager, executive called Meade Bricker, who was the efficiency expert. He was the expert on the line. So much time for each particular task. He actually has a clipboard. He's keeping track. There's visitors watching the men working. But I really want to focus here on this large stamping press. Stamping presses used a lot of force in order to shape the steel. They came down with massive force. They were loud. Air would swoosh up, and the workers were responsible for putting the sheet metal in, having it stamped, and then taking the sheet metal out and continually doing that. And unfortunately, they were dangerous, and workers would lose, they would injure fingers, hands, arms. It was very, very dangerous at that particular time. Now, the stamping press wasn't this big. Rivera made it that big. And actually, this is based upon a composite of 2 stamping presses. A photo of the stamping press that was previously used before Rivera got there in 1932, and the stamping press that was being used in 1932. And the reason Rivera did that is because, look at that shape, Howard. That stamping press, which is very similar to the shape of the stamping press that he was, the composite of the 2 stamping presses, looks like this statue of Quantilique. Quantilique in the Aztec religion was the goddess of creation and destruction, or life and death. And for the Aztecs, Howard, the Quantilique required constant human sacrifice. So Rivera is, making an analogy here. Like Quantilique required constant human sacrifice, the stamping press required constant worker physical and spiritual sacrifice, which is extremely clever in that regard. Now, Howard, what's interesting to me is this guy here. I mean, I know it isn't moose. It's supposed to be moose. It's supposed to be the hair, that's going up because of the swoosh of air that lands with the stamping press. But it's kind of particular, don't you think, Howard?
Ray, I got to tell you, I love it. And one day I was in the museum and I was working in Rivera Court talking to people. And guess who walked in, Ray? Guess who walked in? Could it be this guy came to see himself? I don't know, Ray. What do you think? He was a very kind guy. But I mean, I was like, I had to snap his photo. Look at that. Isn't that great?
Yeah, he was a good sport to let you take that picture.
Yeah, he was a good sport. We actually don't know who he was, and we don't have any idea his relationship, but clearly he was paying attention to that guy, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
This was not staged, Ray. I swear to God, he was watching this. I swear he was just there. I didn't hire him or anything. It was just amazing. Anyway, we need to move on. So there's your south wall. Ray, where are we on this? Is this 9?
You are going to talk about the role of women in the manufacturing process.
That's my job. So here's the role of women. Women had a very small role in the plants at the time. Women were thought to, at that point, to really their place was in their house. It wasn't until World War II and the men all went to war that women took over the major roles in plants and demonstrated their ability. They always knew they had that ability, but nobody believed it until then. In the meantime, they were relegated to doing minor things such as testing spark plugs, sewing interiors, and other things. So Rivera showed us that by putting that up there in that small corner and just representing it that way. Ray?
Right. Now we're going to turn to the pharmaceutical panel, which is on the very left upper corner of the south wall. And it's known as this pharmaceutical panel because Rivera painted it based upon his visit to the Park Davis facility that used to be in Detroit. And Howard, you can see, we got a close-up of this, you can see this fella in the center here. This kind of ghoulish looking fellow is actually based upon an executive, a vice president of Park Davis named Homer French. And Homer was really responsible for finances. And so Rivera depicts him, sort of hunched over with his right hand on a adding machine, an old style adding machine. And he's sitting there counting his money, at a leisure sheet that he's got. And then Rivera surrounds him with, now this is early 1932, or early 30s. These are voluptuous young women, being portrayed here, and Homer doesn't see it. So Rivera's showing how Homer is missing out on life, not noticing these women next to him who are sorting pills. Rivera punctuates that by putting the adding machine on this stand. This stand has many different aspects to it, but one that is obvious are these Gothic arches, these Gothic windows, and this rose shaped window, which are what cathedrals have. So Rivera's just having some fun, Howard. He is basically saying counting money is Homer's religion. Howard?
Right? Christine, are there any questions?
There is a question, but I don't know the answer, so I don't know if you guys will either. Someone is asking if the workers had to supply their own uniforms or whether the Ford Motor Company provided them uniforms. I know what they wore was actually a little different than what we're looking at.
When we looked at Harry Glicksman, he was wearing what he brought from home. He had on his overalls, he had on his shirt, his tie, and his hat. So I will say I will go out on a limb and say Ford did not provide him with a uniform. I can't speak for anybody else.
Yeah, that would be an interesting little research study to see if they were provided uniforms or not. I don't think we've ever explored that.
No, that's a good question.
Hey, Christine, I can say this, that there have been older gentlemen who worked at the factory in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
They would talk about the gloves, you know, the Monty manufacturing gloves, and that they were still being used, and that they had purchased they had purchased those themselves. So I don't know about the rest of it, but I know that the gloves were purchased by the workers.
It's something to think about. And then in your closing today, a few people have asked who joined late how they can watch this again. So save that for the end.
We will do that. So you see the title here, South Wall Finished Car. So far, we've been talking about everything except the car itself, right? So Rivera was really not interested in the finished product. He didn't really care about that. What he cared about was the process. He cared about telling the story. He cared about the interdependency and the constructive and destructive uses of technology. He cared about his themes. He really didn't care about the finished car. But he did put a finished car in. So this is the final assembly, right? And you have this deep moving place. And right up here, he painted in a finished car. And it's so hard to find that when you're there, I'm going to show you where it is. I'm showing you right now. When you're there with friends, it's a good trick to see if they could find the finished car on the south wall. It is a
It's wonderful. I've seen it's kind of a Ford tradition, a Detroit tradition. I've seen grandparents ask their grandchild if they could find it because their grandmother had asked the same question. So like generations of Detroiters have been looking for this car.
And it's 4 inches and it's a replica of the 1932 Ford Roadster. If you Google that, you will find a car on Google that looks similar to this. So finally, we're coming to the end. Oops. And we're back to Valentiner and Ford. There's Etzel up here and Valentiner down here. And Valentiner is holding a piece of paper that Rivera painted there. And when you're there, you can kind of tilt your head a little bit and look at it, and it has actual language on it, actual paragraph. And I'm going to read you the paragraph, or maybe I'm not going to read you the paragraph because I thought I had it, but it's not here. So Amanda, can you jump in and tell us where we can find this on the YouTube channel afterwards, and then we will close.
Sure. So this link is available 24 hours after the program. So you can follow the same link you used to get here today to rewatch the program immediately afterwards. And then within a couple days to a week, it's available on our YouTube page, which you can find on the DIA's website, dia.org, under our senior programming offerings.
Great, thanks. And now I got it. So this paper he's holding reads like this. These frescoes, painted between July 25th, 1932 and March 13th, 1933, while Dr. William Valentiner was director of the Arts Institute, are the gift to the city of Detroit of Mr. Etzel B. Ford, president of the Arts Commission. That's the final area. That's the end. If there's not any further questions, we're going to thank you all. Christine, or we have time for one question, one quick one if there is.
There's just a question about the Homer Fritsch panel and what is underneath his desk.
This particular item here, if that's what they're referring to?
I think so.
Yeah, well, that's a baking device that's used in the pharmaceutical process. And that is the extent of my knowledge, Christine.
Okay. And I seem to remember that Diego Rivera signed that panel in that area too.
Yeah, it's very difficult to see. It's somewhere up here. You can't really make it out. In fact, people have taken cameras with high, lens, high those telegraphic lens, and you can see it that way. But otherwise, it's extremely difficult to see.
Yeah, it's really, unless you're up on the main balcony, it's really difficult to see the details in this panel. Yeah.
But he did sign it in 2 other places that are clearly accessible to people. One is where that laborer is who has the glove, and the other is in the north panel. It's below where Rivera's self-portrait is. It's in the very corner. And those you can see, and he's dated those 2 signatures.
Okay, thanks, Ray.
Well, thank you all. Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Ray. And to the audience, thank you all for being with us today. It was a pleasure to be back with my friend Ray. We haven't done this in a month or so. I want to thank the other teams that were working on this. Ray and I are going to be back next Thursday at 1 o'clock. We're going to be doing a theme of mysteries at the museum. So each of the pieces that we're going to talk about, there's some kind of mystery to them, and we will unveil the secret behind that. In fact, it's a mystery to me today how we got finished with this all in 1 hour. So again, thank you all. That's it. We'll see you next Thursday at the museum.
Bye.